Hello, beautiful souls, and welcome to this episode of Holistic Healing with Lori. I'm really excited about what we're talking about today for myself, actually, but also for you. This is a topic that's out there, and there's so little information about what to do about it. And it's not only very difficult, kind of aesthetically, for women, but also it can be very painful, and that is endometriosis. Now, we're told on the internet, we're told by the medical community that this is a hormone issue and that they don't really know exactly why it's there, and that basically the only way that you can address it unsuccessfully through diet and lifestyle and things like that, and also by having them physically removed by doing procedures that are expensive. And then what they also say about those procedures is, yeah, a lot of times it comes back. So I'm almost in my 50s myself, and hit a really tough time several years ago with perimenopause. And I thought that that was just what happened for some women. But if you've been with me for a while, you also know that um, I get at the root of what's going on. I'm not just going to say, okay, it's just because I'm getting old. I'm not going to say to a client or a student, that's just because you're getting old. That's just because your hormones are whacked out. Now, I'm not saying not to address hormones because that can be very helpful in the meantime, but what's underneath that? What's causing the hormones to get whacked out? And in the case of endometriosis, what's causing the body to respond in this way by creating these masses in the belly area? We're not gonna get super technical about this, right? Now, let's start with the supposition, which is where I always start, that the body is really smart and that the body is very wise. And so it's not going to start doing stuff willy-nilly without a reason, even with like autoimmunity and things like that. And we'll talk about that in another podcast episode. But when we think about endometriosis, I was looking at it and I was like, all right, the body is trying to wall something off, right? It's trying to protect the rest of the body from something. And sure enough, as I did more digging and more digging, I ran across more and more sources, trusted sources, that said, yeah, this is absolutely the body trying to wall off things like parasites, right? Things like helminths and other pathogens. So I think it took me about a year and change. And let me show this picture to you. So I've had a flat belly for a long time. This is where I was at the kind of the beginning of this journey, right? My belly had just gotten bigger and bigger and bigger over the course of several years, and it was very uncomfortable. Of course, I didn't like the way it looked, right? But it was also very uncomfortable. It made it hard for me to breathe. I didn't experience any of the pain that a lot of you who are out there watching this who do have endometriosis might be experiencing, and I'm so sorry for that for you. But this is good news, right? Because it means that that you can do something about it, which is what we're talking about today. So anyway, this is where I was in the beginning. Now, even at this point, I had been eating right. I had been very low carb, no sugar, exercising, all those things that we know to do in order to take care of ourselves. And I had actually been treating for parasites for, I think at that point, at least a year. um, for sure. But what I realized was that I had more work to do. Right. So this is not something that you want to just jump into, just straight away taking enzymes to break down the fibrin that makes up those masses of the endometriosis. You don't want to start doing that right away. You don't want to start with the heavy antiparasitics right away. And you want to make sure that you're doing this in the right order, right? If you've watched my other podcasts about how we address chronic illness, even, you know that we want to do it in a certain order so that it's effective, but also so that it doesn't just floor the body when we have all these toxins coming out, right? So the thing about parasites is that when they die, they actually release their toxins, right? They break apart and they themselves are toxic to the body, but also what they have inside of them is toxic to the body as well. So we want to be careful with how we do it, right? So, like I said, I had already been doing a lot of those things that we need to do beforehand. But even with that, I was super frustrated because I was like, well, why does my belly still look like this when it's been flat my whole life? Like, what is that about? So frustrating. And again, I would talk to friends here and there, and they would be like, "Yeah, well, we just have to get used to things like that with aging and things like that." And I was like, "Well," but in my head, I would just am thinking, "No, absolutely not." So for a year and 4 months, I consistently really went at it I did several coffee enemas every day. And I know that that's taboo for some people, but it's extremely, extremely helpful. And for a number of reasons, right? Sometimes the puffiness can also come from liver issues as well, contributes to that. And the coffee enemas are very helpful to help the body to eradicate parasites. They're not anti-parasitic themselves, but also to help out the liver with this whole process, right? Because we are looking at the body as a whole here. It's not just about eradicating the parasites. It's also about making sure that your drainage pathways are open. So making sure that your gut's working properly, making sure that you're pooping every day, making sure that your liver is working as well as it possibly can to pull out those toxins, right? The more toxins you have in your body, the more likely you are to have a proliferation of parasites and other pathogens, right? So what was happening for me is that that my body was like, oh my gosh, there are all these big parasites in here. We need to encapsulate them to protect the body. Now, there are other places that parasites live, but they love wide open spaces also, right? So the uterus is a great place for them to thrive. The GI system, of course, the GI tract. But yeah, so I consistently did my coffee enemas. I stuck with my eating plan. Took enzymes. I took my antiparasitics. And what did finally happen? I mean, I barely even noticed it because I was also working on other symptoms, But what ended up happening was this. And that took 16 months. Let me show you a picture of those two side by side so you can see the difference there, right? The poofy, and this area was hard. It wasn't like squishy. There were obviously those growths in there. And then this. And this is still not, I mean, honestly, there's still work to be done here. But when you look at that difference and you hear the stories about how many women have this issue, and again, it's all or mostly attributed to hormonal imbalance, right? Now, I am addressing hormones as well, but that is a kind of icing on the cake because we want to be getting at the root cause issues. You know, why did the hormones get so out of whack? Why did the belly get so puffy like this with the endometriosis? Why did the endometriosis develop? So this let me know that things were heading in the right direction. Not only that, but I did just like so many of my students and clients, I did see evidence in the toilet, right? So one of the telltale signs of parasites is something called bruxism, and this is grinding your teeth, or even just a tight jaw, especially at night, and restless leg syndrome, just general GI issues, right? Digestion issues, diarrhea, constipation, IBS, all these different things. And also anxiety, depression. A lot of the parasites actually release neurotoxins. So it's really fascinating. Parasites are one of my favorite things to talk about because they are so fascinating and because it's one of the first places that clients and students can see actual physical evidence of what has been causing their symptoms, of what has been causing them to feel the fatigue, the depression, the irritability even too, the extreme PMS. Oh my gosh, one of my students, she reached out several months ago and she was like, I can't believe this, but my PMS symptoms are completely gone. And I used to have to set an alarm for 2 a.m. to take ibuprofen so that I didn't wake up in so much pain that I couldn't function. And she would have to take a ridiculous amount of ibuprofen every time for days, And she said, I haven't had to do that. I can barely tell even when my period is coming now because I don't have symptoms anymore. And that was through parasite work, mostly actually for her parasite work. I think at that point she had passed lots of parasites. And the thing is that we think that it's not going to happen to us, right? We think that it can't be an issue, especially because the doctors in our medical system, well, our medical system just doesn't see it as an issue in the US, in developed countries. But it absolutely is, and it's happening more and more and more. So I really encourage you to have an open mind about this, and also to just know that parasite testing is ridiculously inaccurate. I've had so many students come to me and say at the beginning of whichever program they're doing, or one-on-one clients, and say, well, I just got a test, a parasite stool test, and everything came back negative, or it only came back positive for this one thing, and I've taken the meds for it. And then we get started, they get started, and sometimes even just from following the eating plan, they start to see parasites. Every single student and client that has come through and said, I had parasite testing done and it came back negative, every single one of those people has seen parasites. So if it weirds you out, I totally understand. I was in denial for, well, probably for about a decade and a half, actually, from when I was very, very, very sick back in my 20s. But yeah, you start to appreciate that you can actually see what's causing the problems. And I'll leave you with one more student story before we sign off here. And that is, she had been really struggling. She's very sensitive to supplements, to foods. I think she was down to about 5 foods that she could tolerate. And about so it was very slow moving for her, right? But I think it was just with going onto the eating plan, and we did work around it for her, right? But I think it was just from going on to the eating plan that she did end up seeing a couple, I think, of parasites in the toilet, and she said that she did a dance. She was like whooping it up, running around the house doing a dance because she was so excited to see the evidence of some of the things that had been making her feel so horrible for so long. And she had chronic fatigue syndrome, y'all. So the fact that she was running around the house, she did have a little bit of post-exertional malaise afterwards, but um it it's exciting. It might, it's a little gross in the beginning, but then you get used to it and you're like, oh, well, hello. Hello again to you. So we're going to be talking in other podcast episodes about some of the other considerations to keep in mind with parasite work. And these are all things that we do go over in the various different heal programs. I will make a bold statement that if you have chronic symptoms, you're going to have a parasite problem. So it's something worth addressing. And, even by some weird, crazy chance, if that's not a thing for you, if you do have chronic symptoms, but you don't have parasites, and again, it's not a thing. But if it were, it's still a really good idea to take preventive measures a few times a year. Other countries just do that. The doctors actually say, okay, time for your parasite cleanse. Boom. They do that. That's what we used to do in the olden days. Please share this with friends, family, anybody who you think will benefit from it. And I'll see you in the next episode. Lots of love.